For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Investigative journalist Michael Schmidt joins me to discuss his new book, Drinking with Ghosts, The Aftermath of Apartheid's Dirty War. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, Drinking with Ghosts, The Aftermath of Apartheid's Dirty War is a fascinating exploration of South Africa's dark past. Why did you write this story, and what do you hope South Africans will learn from it?
The personal imperative behind writing something like this was really that I feel that my generation, I'm 48 years old, straddle a very critical period in our country's history, and that is that we stand with one foot in autocracy and one foot in democracy. And while the previous generation, I feel, are very much in positions of, well, certainly there are that a layer of them that are in positions of power today, are very much shaped by the past, and the generations subsequent to us are very much shaped by, I guess, Twitter and the world of tomorrow. We are that bridging generation, and so I think we have an important historical role to play in terms of interpreting the transition. And so far, I think a lot of the transition has been about change, and there have been enormous and dramatic changes, as you know. But a lot of the things that have kind of crept up and ambushed us, such as, let's say, the police behavior at Marikana and this type of thing, I think relate to a much deeper structural continuity that hasn't really been properly reported. So it's the dynamic tension between change and continuity that I wanted to look at.
Your book unpacks and reflects on the covert and overt actions carried out by those by the state during apartheid, as well as those operatives during those years. Why do you believe it's necessary to revisit this dirty war?
Because, well, let's start with the very concept of dirty war in the first place. The South African situation is often held to be entirely unique, whereas it really does need to be located, although there was a lot of domestic drivers of the conflict, particularly in Angola, which are going to be, there's a book coming out by Justin Pierce imminently about the domestic conditions that gave rise to the civil war in Angola. But you can't extract that from the broader context of the Cold War. So although obviously apartheid was a racialized system of exploitation, the dirty war in particular, and by dirty war I mean the nuclear weapons program, the chemical and biological warfare program, the death squads, cross-border raids, assassinations, massacres, these sort of things that fell outside of sort of conventional war, if you will, were very much driven by the context of the Cold War. So we need to reassess, I think, the autocracy against that backdrop, and also the coming of democracy. It's patently clear that the collapse of the Berlin Wall was the trigger that precipitated change in South Africa, with the transition to democracy in Namibia being the test case that proved that things could go relatively smoothly. So, and the very fact that South Africa changed so immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union shows how integral the Cold War was to the situation. That's not to say that there were no domestic drivers. Of course there were, but clearly we were integral to the Cold War. So I've made a comparative analysis between South Africa and Chile in the same period, Chile under Pinochet and South Africa under Pierre Botha. And I think this is also necessary because this is why I use the term dirty war, that it's a term very much used in the southern cone of Latin America to describe Operation Condor, which was a multinational, essentially right-wing intelligence operation against perceived enemies on the left, that also resorted to all sorts of dirty tricks. So I think in terms of the death toll, in terms of the geopolitical situation, South Africa and Chile were kind of comparable. They were more autocratic than we were. They were much more distinctly a military dictatorship. We were sort of a militarized pseudo-democracy. So, but there's a lot of commonality. So that's why I use the term dirty war. And lastly, this very much shapes where we are at today because of structural continuities.
Mm. Now, you've written the book in 5 parts. Why did you write it like that, and which was the most difficult part to write?
Well, I started out with a different structure, I guess. And in fact, the book eventually became 2 books. So this is the first of 2 volumes. The second one will come out next year. It's called Rusted Rainbow, and it's looking at conditions of exclusion in democratic South Africa. So whether it is illegal coal miners, poor whites, bushmen, etc., people who live on the margins, who actually constitute collectively the majority, in fact. The 5 parts really came down to themes. The way I've written the book is in first person historical present tense. So I would say, for instance, it's Tuesday the 26th of June 1991, and I'm in the newsroom and something breaks, and this is how I followed up. So I'm getting the reader to walk through it with me from my point of ignorance as a young journalist to my point of, I suppose, well, it'd be hard to claim expertise necessarily, but a relatively fuller understanding as a senior journalist. So get the reader to walk that path with me. So there's a narrative flow to the thing that is sequential, but then also I need to divvy it up thematically. So the first chapter is really around the nuclear weapons program, but also moves into the current era with rogue proliferators, people who are involved in the nuclear black market. And the second chapter then goes on to Project Coast, which is our chemical and biological warfare program that was wrapped up in the early democratic era, in fact, and looks at the death squads as well. Then the third chapter looks at interventions by the armed forces in the region, and that takes us right up to the 98 invasion of Lesotho and Central African Republic.
Which one was the most difficult to write of those chapters?
I think perhaps the first one, the nuclear weapons, because so little is really known. It really is about putting together a puzzle. There have been a series of recent declassifications of documents, and particularly work done by American investigative reporters that have brought to light key aspects of how the program developed in the 1970s in particular, and the military collaboration with Israel. So yeah, but that was probably the hardest chapter because it's so occluded.
Now, the chapter titled The Long Shadow, Exporting War and Peace, you explore the role South Africa played in the Bush War in Angola, as well as the country's subsequent role as, and I quote, regional arbiter for evil, or perhaps even for good. What do you mean by this?
Well, I think in many respects we've continued our role as an intervener in the continent, but the drivers are different. When we intervened in the Civil War in 75 and then again in 78 in Angola, there really was no intention of planting the South African flag. I don't think on the Parliament buildings in Luanda and ruling Angola as some sort of satellite apartheid state in the same way as we were doing with Southwest Africa as it was then. We just didn't have the capacity to do that. The intention was clearly to defeat the MPLA and to have an outcome, or at least a government that was pluralistic enough to not be a threat to the South African regime. But the prerogatives have now changed significantly. The rationale for being in these places has changed significantly. Obviously, they're peacekeeping operations. We've got troops and officers stationed in very many places all over the continent. We're obviously involved in constructive work in Eastern DRC, in Darfur. We've got forces as well. As part of the African Union forces, we've got observers in Eritrea, etc., all over the place. Our seafaring capacity, which is often kind of derided, people say, why do we have a navy? Forgetting that, of course, our maritime territory is sort of 3 times the area of our country, and that we have the only really significant navy in the region, in the sub-Saharan region. So we've really become very important partners for the French, who've got a South Indian Ocean presence, and of course further up the coast, dealing with piracy in both the bight of West Africa and along the Somali coast. To what extent these are legitimate multilateral operations, and to what extent they're really just advancing the cause of other parties, it's not necessarily easy to ascertain.
Finally, you are also the director of the Institute for the Advancement of Journalism. Tell us about this institute and why it is necessary to have such a forum in South Africa.
Well, we're a non-profit, which means that we had a tough year because of the backlash from the fallout from the economic crisis in Europe. But we've been going for 22 years, and hopefully we'll still be around into the future. We train mid-career journalists and also communicators across Africa, so on the ground. We train we've got a lot of focus on the new emerging digital media platforms. On the investigation side, things such as data scraping, so how to trawl through massive data sets and pull out trends and changes. Things such as infographics, how to represent complex data, in particular investigations, in an easily digestible way for your audience. A big focus on investigations. Quite a big focus now, increasingly, on things such as the extractives industries, the power industry, power generation and supply on the continent, trade and finance, illicit tax flows, which we do in conjunction with Thomson Reuters, which is one of their key areas of focus. Really specialist reporting and digital media are our core focus areas. You can expect to see us developing in the direction of doing more media consultancy as well, particularly to the SETAs that we're involved with, but also to government, corporates, and the civil sector, civil society sector. There's a lot of really interesting innovations that we are looking at. Certainly, we want to get into the distance learning arena. We're looking at constructing a virtual campus because we have a lot of interest expressed from journalists in West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, etc., who want to come and train with us. And obviously, very expensive to fly them out here, so let's come up with a distance learning project. So we got 2 of those in the pipeline. We're busy talking to international partners on that, we're really just trying to make sure that our offerings are very much tailored to the market, and it's a very difficult, rapidly shifting market. I think Africa is facing a really exciting future in terms of digital media and news provision, because ironically, precisely because we don't have the kind of infrastructure that more developed countries have, we are presented with the only option is to leapfrog all of the intermediary steps and go straight to digital media, to go straight to the provision of news via smartphone or at least feature phone. So yeah, I think it's a necessity being the mother of invention. Our lack of resources is in fact a great driver of inventiveness in the field of journalism. So I think we're going to see some really exciting things in the future.
Well, I wish you all the best with that, and thank you very much for chatting with me.
Yeah, many thanks. Appreciate your time.
That was Michael Schmidt speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about his book, Drinking with Ghosts, The Aftermath of Apartheid's Dirty War.